Today, let's dive into a really fascinating idea from the 13th century from St. Bonaventure. It's all about something we do every single day, naming things. Now, what if I told you that a name wasn't just a simple label, but could actually be a key to understanding reality itself? We're going to unpack this whole concept based on a wonderful thesis by Joshua Lahong. I mean, really think about that for a second. When you name your dog, or you name a project you're working on, or even when you just call a tree, what's actually going on in that moment? It seems so basic, right? Well, Bonaventure has a perspective that might just flip your understanding of this everyday act on its head. Okay, so here's the fundamental difference. The modern view, the one we're all used to, tends to see a name as a convenient label. It's just a sound, a word we all agree on to point at something. But for Bonaventure, a true name is so much more. It's like a window. It's a statement about what that thing is, an attempt to capture its actual reality. So how in the world do we get to a name that can capture reality? Well, Bonaventure builds his whole idea in two major parts. And the first part is very logical, almost scientific. It's a foundation he gets from the ancient Greek philosopher Aristotle. This is the classic way to define something. You start with a big, broad category, a big bucket. Let's call it the genus. Then you figure out what makes this one thing special, what makes it different from everything else in that bucket. And that unique quality, that's its differentia. For Bonaventure, this is step one. You absolutely have to know what something is compared to everything else. Let's use the most famous example to make this super clear. How do you define a human? Well, we start with the broad category, the genus. We're animals. But of course, that includes everything from spiders to elephants. So what's our unique characteristic, our differentia? It's that we're rational. So a human is a rational animal, see? For Bonaventure, this isn't just some random name, it's a precise description of our nature. But Bonaventure doesn't just stop with these logical categories. He adds a second layer, and this one is much, much deeper. He believed that the entire physical world, everything around us, is like a giant book full of signs that all point to something beyond themselves, and that something is God. So, a rock isn't just a rock, it's also a reflection of the one who made it. Every single thing in creation, from a tiny insect to a giant star, carries some kind of echo of its creator. And to truly know a thing, you have to be able to see that reflection. And Bonaventure actually sees a kind of hierarchy in these reflections. At the most basic level, something like a stone is a shadow. It points to a creator, but in a very faint, general way. A step up from that is a vestige, which is more like a footprint. It shows more clearly the power, wisdom, and goodness of the one who made it. But the highest level of all is an image. And only rational creatures like you and me are considered images. Because our very powers, our ability to remember, to understand, and to choose, are a direct reflection of the inner life of God. So we've got these two big ideas, the logical and the spiritual. How do they come together? Well, for Bonaventure, a truly good name has to do both. It has to capture a thing's identity in this world, its logical Aristotelian definition, and its identity in relation to God, its deeper Platonic meaning as a sign. You see, a real name isn't just a single piece of information. It's actually a statement about relationships. It answers three questions. What is this thing in and of itself? How does it relate to all the other created things? And, crucially, how does it relate back to its ultimate origin, to its creator? To really know a flower is to understand it as a creature of God. And for Bonaventure, the perfect person to model this way of seeing and naming the world was his spiritual father, St. Francis of Assisi. Think about it. When St. Francis called the sun brother and the moon sister, he wasn't just being poetic. In Bonaventure's view, he was giving them their true names. He was identifying them based on their most fundamental relationship of all. They were all created by the same Father. By naming creation as his family, Francis was making a really profound metaphysical statement. He was recognizing what's called Franciscan poverty. It's this idea that nothing created exists on its own power. Everything, from a person to the sun to the moon, is completely and utterly dependent on God just to exist. And that shared dependence, that's what makes us all family. Okay, so if St. Francis is the perfect example of someone who names things correctly, then who is the perfect example of someone who is named? For Bonaventure, the ultimate example, without a doubt, is the Blessed Virgin Mary. Her many, many titles aren't just compliments. They are true names that get to the very heart of her essence. Bonaventure calls her all sorts of things: star of the sea, a pillar of fire, mother of God, and even a bitter sea. Now, these might just sound like beautiful poetry, but within Bonaventure's framework, they are incredibly descriptive. They are all attempts to name a reality that is just too deep and profound for any single word.
And here's the key to why these names work so well. As Joshua Lahong explains in his work, her names are successful because her entire being is defined by her perfect relationship to God. She is so completely filled with God's grace that her very identity is that relationship. So names like Mother of God or Star of the Sea aren't just describing things she did. For Bonaventure, they describe who she is. They perfectly reveal her place in the great order of reality.
So what does this all add up to? Well, it takes this simple act of naming something and it transforms it into an act with profound spiritual significance. It becomes an act of recognition, an act of deep understanding, and in the end, an act of worship. Ultimately, when we name something correctly in this Bonaventurean way, what we're really doing is seeing it in its proper context. We're recognizing its place in the grand design of creation. And to see that design, to understand that everything has its place because it was put there, is to acknowledge the Creator. The act of naming, when done right, becomes an act of praise. Let's finish with this incredible quote from St. Bonaventure himself because it just wraps this whole vision up so perfectly. When we finally learn to see and name the world as it truly is, we start to hear this universal chorus where every single created thing, just by being what it is, points back to its source.